Deathwing, I gave it a 1 star on Goodreads. I would have given this a negative stars, but that isn't an option. So I gave it a 1 star. And the only reason I would say it earns a 1 star truly is the dragons, because I'm gonna be honest, the dragons were the best part of the book. As I once heard it be said, it's hard to fuck up dragons in any fantasy setting, and I have to agree with that here. The dragons are genuinely the best part. Now, I don't know if that changes in, the next books, but I would prefer to remain ignorant, and I don't plan on reading the next books, because I genuinely despised this one book. And why do I despise it? Well, I despise it for a litany of reasons. The main one being the main character. I hated Violet so much. She is, honestly, kind of a Mary Sue. She's also just very, very stupid for being so smart. That's one thing I don't like about a lot of romantasy books. They make out these main characters to be, so smart. Like, they're the smartest people we know, and, blah, blah, blah. But they're so irredeemably stupid. Violet is so unbelievably dumb in this book. It is ridiculous, especially towards the end. Now, I will give a warning. This does and will contain spoilers. But, come on, who cares? At this point, everybody and their mom has probably heard of this book, and more than likely has heard spoilers, so, there's nothing shocking here. Let's get started with the small rant, shall we? Let's start off with the elephant in the room, Violet, specifically her disability. To give, my credentials, I have the same disability as Violet, which is hypermobility Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, or HEDS, or EDS if you want to get all technical, because HEDS is, under the umbrella of EDS, but, whatever. Violet has the same thing that I have, and I have the same thing that Violet has. And that is where the biggest problem with my book comes in. The representation of EDS. Now, I get Rebecca Yarros has, and she wanted to be represented in her book, and I'm not angry at her for that. I'm just mad at how it's represented in the book. It's the wrong place to have someone with EDS be, if that makes sense. This is a war college. If her bones and muscles, if they break and sprain so easily, why is she there? I have an injury that lasted for almost 10 years that kept, bothering me. I had to get 2 surgeries to fix it. I had to be casted multiple times. There were weeks I could not walk because I sprained it so suddenly. I once sprained it just standing up from my desk. My mom watched it blow up like a balloon because it, just sprained so suddenly like that. If Violet genuinely has the problems that are stated in the book where she continuously sprains at, the simplest little things, how is she still alive at this college by the end of the book? And how has she not gotten such a serious injury that it would literally prevent her from being able to continue at the college? How is she able to push through all the physical activities that are demanded of a freaking war college where it's okay to murder the other people within this war college? That hurts my soul because I have, like I said, I have the same disability. And if it were me, I would not be allowed to join the military with those disabilities, but that's up for debate as well. The United States Navy, the United States military. Well, I say Navy because my dad is a former Navy, but whatever. I'm not sure if I would be able to join the military or not in the U.S. because, things are a little different now, but, whatever. It's just, how is she able to join this with these disabilities? How did she last as long as she did? She should have died, theoretically, at the parapet, because if she's so loosey-goosey with her joints and all that, her ankles would have probably given out trying to stay balanced on the wet surface of the parapet. I know for sure I would have. I have definitely slipped on things before and sprained my ankles because of wet surfaces. So yeah, there's that. But it's also the representation of pushing through the pain with your disability. I don't like how all over the internet, all the articles about Violet's disability portray the representation as a good thing. Representation is awesome. I want more representation. I want EDS to be represented in a good way. But how it's done in this book is genuinely terrible. I think a better example of EDS would be Firefly from Honkai Star Rail. Now, I didn't get too far into Honkai Star Rail, but I know for a fact that the character Firefly has EDS canonically. And actually, one of her voice actresses, I believe it is the Japanese voice actress, also has EDS. But I believe from what I know about the character Firefly, she actually has a better representation of EDS because she has something that helps her to do her duty as one of the Stellaron Hunters. I think that's what they're called. She has a robotic suit of armor that allows her to, do her job as a Stellaron Hunter. And I think that's a better way to showcase or how to write in a character that has a disability. Give them something that actually actively helps them. Violet in Fourth Wing does receive this help. She's offered a saddle, which why this college doesn't have all the riders have saddles is beyond me. This seems like a very stupid idea for supposedly being at war for 400 years and somehow no one losing on either side for that 400 years. I'm questioning the logistics of that. But Violet is offered a saddle, and she doesn't take it because she's like, no, that's not going to help me. Or no, it's going to help me, but everybody will see me as weak. It's like, well, technically speaking, you are weak. That's just a matter of fact. But if it's so easy to hurt yourself, I would take that. I would personally take the saddle and just deal with it. Because you have your dragon at this point. I mean, they can still kill you even if you have a dragon, but that's still so lame. That whole death thing at the college is so lame, and I will get into that a little bit more in a little bit, but I'm still talking about the disability. Violet, at one point in the book, twists her ankle so badly she cannot walk. She's literally crawling on the ground, saying that pain is shooting up her leg. Then one chapter later, she's up and walking on it. And that part particularly strikes a chord with me because I mentioned I had an injury that almost lasted a decade. It was a sprained ankle that lasted almost a decade. Well, broken leg, sprained ankle, but it was the sprain that lasted the longest because sprains are worse injuries to have than a broken bone because the sprain has the risk of coming back over and over and over again. I have sprained my ankle multiple times, and when I do that, I legitimately cannot walk on it for a whole week. Because it was so bad, even if it was like just me standing up that caused it. I don't get how Violet was standing up. Right in that next chapter, it is so ridiculously dumb. The representation of EDS in this book is very questionable in my opinion, and it should not have as many props as it does from like a bunch of different news sources and even people from the EDS Society. I just don't think it's good representation for them. For two other reasons. One comes from a video that I watched by Reads with Rachel where she was ranting about Fourth Wing, saying how Violet has internalized ableism. Now, Reads with Rachel doesn't have EDS, but I do agree with the sentiment of it being internalized EDS. Because Violet is saying that it's making her weak, pathetic, and that she just has to push through it. Now, I will admit myself, I definitely have internalized ableism myself with that, but I usually don't complain about my disability in that type of ableistic way. Unless I'm, like, having a really big mental health problem at that moment. Now, sometimes I'm just like, why was I born this way? But for the most part, I can handle it relatively fine. At this point, I have a system set up in case, something does end up happening to me, like, with any of my joints. But I do agree with the sentiment that Violet has internalized ableism, which is not a good representation to have, especially of EDS, where it's a chronic issue that causes a lot of pain. Then the other thing that I saw was that it pushes, I don't remember what it was called, but it was from an article I read. But basically, it pushes the toxic idea that we have to push through the pain. If I find the article again, I will link it in the description. But the idea that we have to push through the pain as people with EDS is really bad because we burn out very easily. I mean, debatably so. I just went through a whole flare-up of my condition, and it was awful. I did not want to do anything. I was so exhausted, and everything just hurt. The idea of pushing through that does not sound pleasant, because it's hard to, just get up and stand up and do things as it is with your flare-ups. Pushing through it at a war college sounds even worse, which brings me to the next problem I have with the book, the war college. This war college is so inefficient. It is built so terribly. The world building of this book in general is awful, but the college is especially so. Is why is it okay to murder the other students just to get a dragon? Don't murder the students. Have them go to the infantry, because I didn't even realize an infantry existed until I watched Reads with Rachel's video ranting about it. I was just like, wait, there's a fucking infantry? Why can't they just push people into this infantry when they don't get a dragon? That seems very illogical, and it's just, oh my gosh, it's so bad. Why are we forcing the kids of the rebellion that failed into this college with your fucking dragons? That seems counterintuitive. That seems like a recipe for disaster, and it was indeed a recipe for disaster, spoiler alert. And, don't get me started on the lovers plots, the enemies to lovers. That was not enemies to lovers. They didn't like each other for like 15 pages, and then he saves her life and she suddenly starts thirsting for the man. There's a whole fucking chapter dedicated to her thirsting over him as she's fighting to the death. I think she was fighting to the death. I don't know. She was thirsting over him so much. That was the same chapter where they had sex for the first time, which, was definitely fun to read when you've got a puritanical sister that covered it up with sticky notes. Fun fact. She even has a makeout session covered up. It's not like there's anything too graphic in there, but that's another story for another time. Well, I mean, it's kind of related, but whatever. They're not enemies. They were barely even rivals. They just didn't like each other. Then again, it's not like they even openly despised each other. It's just like, oh, you killed my brother. Or, no, your dad killed my brother. I don't remember who killed the brother. It was somebody related to Zayden. But I know for sure, oh, your mom killed my father, which was, Violet's mom to Zayden's dad. But that isn't even an enemies thing, because real enemies would be, like, they were literally on opposite sides of a war. That would have been so much better. Fourth Wing, when it's them already at war, and it's like, Zayden's on the one side of the war, Violet's on the other side of the war. That would have been so much better. I fucking despise these characters. Also, Dane. He's unreasonable. Should have died. Should have been killed. He should not have lived. Jack being allergic and almost dying to fucking oranges is utterly hilarious, I will admit. But then he dies again, but apparently he's alive in Iron Flame, and I don't get it. I don't get any of this. And, what else was there? There was something else that I didn't like. It's just, the dialogue is very cringy. It doesn't sound like at all like fantasy. This reads more like modern times, at least in terms of the language spoken, than it does as a fantasy book. I've always pointed to Lord of the Rings as the de facto fantasy. That's written like a fantasy. It is a fantasy. I've always called it a fantasy. I don't call Fourth Wing a fantasy. I call it a romance book that has not even a fantasy background. It's not fantasy. It's barely romantic. It's just a romance with a fantasy background. And just overall, this book is terrible. Would not recommend unless you want something to hate read and just laugh at, because I'll admit, I raised a few eyebrows. I went like, this is so pathetic. Even the sex scenes were kind of cringe. Now, I kind of looked underneath the post-its just to see what it was, and I'll be honest, as a fic writer, I've definitely written better smut than this. Not to brag. Okay, humble brag, I will. But this is just a terrible book with terrible disability representation, at least for those with EDS. Now, I can't personally recommend any books with that kind of representation, because it doesn't exist. That was one reason Fourth Wing got so many accolades in terms of the disability representation. Is because it was the first mainstream book, to my knowledge, to have a person or a main character with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And there is the representation of a deaf person in there, which I will give props to that. At least that I feel like that was handled pretty well. Because, well, there's not really much you can complain about with a person that's deaf in a book. It's easier to represent them on paper than it would be in, like, anime, manga, cartoons. I feel like it would be hard to represent it in that, but it's easier in books. I will not complain about that. EDS, I absolutely will, because it's just terrible way to showcase my disability. And like I said, Honkai Star Rail does a better job with representing the disability than the book Fourth Wing does. Would I recommend Honkai Star Rail? Not really. You gotta deal with a lot of power creep in the game. I didn't get that far into it. I could not get past Penacony, and that's because my phone was literally about to fucking blow up. But, whatever. But overall, Fourth Wing is just a terrible book. Would not recommend. 1 out of 10, and it's only a 10. Not a 1, not 10. It's only a 1 because of the dragons. I hope you enjoyed this rant of mine. Bye.